Jack Reynolds moved across his front porch with the practiced silence of a man who'd spent years where sound meant death. The coffee in his hand steamed in the cool morning air, his weathered face catching the first light of dawn. His ranch house sat on a rise, giving him a clear view of the southern pastures that stretched toward the Mexican border 3 miles away. From this vantage point, nothing looked out of place, but Jack knew better. 20 years with special forces had taught him that danger rarely announced itself. It whispered. It disturbed patterns. It left traces only the trained eye could detect. Like the dust cloud rising from the access road yesterday that belonged to no scheduled visitor. Or the disturbed gravel at his property line. Small things. Things his neighbors would dismiss. The ranch had been in the Reynolds family for 4 generations. Jack had grown up here before joining the Army at 18, returning only for brief visits during his military career. But when his father died 3 years ago, Jack had come home for good, trading his combat boots for cowboy boots, his rifle for ranch tools. Or so he'd thought. He took a sip of coffee, as methodically scanning the horizon. The 500-acre ranch sprawled across rugged terrain, scrubland dotted with mesquite trees, rocky outcroppings, and hidden arroyos that ran with water during the rare Texas downpours. Perfect cover for anyone wanting to cross undetected. Perfect terrain for ambush. Jack recognized it because he'd used similar terrain in Afghanistan, Iraq, and a dozen places official records would never name. "Morning, Captain." Jack didn't startle at the voice. He'd heard Diego's footsteps crossing the gravel driveway 30 seconds earlier. "Morning. And it's just Jack now. Been a civilian longer than you've been alive." Diego Rodriguez, barely 25, had been working at the ranch for 2 years. Smart kid. Reliable. One of the few people Jack trusted to help manage the property. "Coffee's fresh," Jack said, gesturing toward the pot he'd brewed at 0500 hours. Civilian life hadn't broken his military schedule. "Thought I saw lights down by the south fence last night," Diego said, pouring himself a cup. "Around 2 in the morning." Jack nodded. He'd seen them too, watching from his bedroom window through night vision binoculars he wasn't supposed to own anymore. Probably coyotes. Both men understood he didn't mean the 4-legged kind. The border region had changed over the decades. What once had been occasional crossings by migrants looking for work had evolved into sophisticated operations by cartels moving drugs, weapons, and people. Jack's ranch, with its strategic location and varied terrain, made it valuable real estate for such enterprises. "We need to fix that stretch of fence by Coyote Creek," Jack said casually. What he meant was, "We need to check for signs of intrusion." Diego nodded his understanding. Inside the ranch house, the decor spoke of generations of ranching life. Faded family photographs lined pine-paneled walls. A deer head, his grandfather's prize, watched from above the stone fireplace. Nothing suggested that the owner had once commanded elite soldiers in the world's most dangerous regions. Nothing except the locked room that had been his father's study, now converted to what Jack simply called his office. The combination locked door and signal jammer weren't standard ranch equipment. Jack moved through the house with the same economy of motion he'd used on operations, no wasted energy, no unnecessary noise. He entered the office, closed the door, and pressed his palm against a hidden scanner disguised as a wooden panel. A section of bookshelf slid aside, revealing a small armory that would make a military quartermaster raise eyebrows. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. His satellite phone buzzed. Few people had this number. "Reynolds." "Jack, it's Mike Brennan." Brennan was local border patrol, and one of the few who knew Jack's background. They'd served together briefly before Brennan took a bullet in Fallujah. "What's up, Mike?" "Thought you should know. We intercepted a group coming across 2 miles south of your place last night. These weren't your typical migrants. Well armed. Military gear. One of them had cartel tattoos, Sinaloa." Jack processed this, mentally mapping cartel territories. Sinaloa working this far east was unusual. They typically operated further west. They had maps, Jack. Detailed ones. Your ranch was circled. The implications were clear. "Thanks for the heads up. I've doubled patrols near your sector, but we're stretched thin. Watch yourself." Jack ended the call and stood motionless, mind cycling through scenarios, contingencies, options, the tactical assessment as automatic as breathing. He dealt with insurgents in mountain villages, terrorists in urban labyrinths, hostage takers in remote compounds. Different enemies, same principles. Know your terrain. Control access points. Establish early warning. Prepare fallback positions. The difference was that now, his terrain was home. Out the window, he could see the old barn where he'd learned to ride. The oak tree where his father had taught him to shoot. The creek where he'd fished as a boy. This wasn't just another battlefield. This was the land his great-grandfather had worked with bleeding hands. Land his grandfather had defended against rustlers. Land his father had preserved through drought and economic hardship. Now it fell to Jack. He accessed a hidden panel in the floor, retrieving a satellite imagery map of his property. Military contacts still owed him favors, and this wasn't the kind of map available on Google. He studied it, identifying vulnerable approaches, natural choke points, observation positions. The ranch had been designed with defense in mind, though his ancestors had been thinking of Apache raids, not cartel incursions. The main house sat on high ground with clear sight lines in all directions. The outbuildings were arranged to create a defensible perimeter. Even the trees had been planted to provide cover for the house without blocking visibility. Jack had enhanced these features subtly since returning home. Solar-powered motion sensors disguised as garden lights. Cameras hidden in birdhouses. Reinforced doors and windows that looked perfectly ordinary. To casual observation, it was just an old Texas ranch. To informed eyes, it was a fortress. He selected a compact 9mm from his collection, checking it with practiced hands before securing it in a concealed holster. Some habits never changed. He hadn't left home unarmed since his return. Outside, the Texas sun now blazed overhead. Jack supervised ranch operations with his customary quiet efficiency. Fences needed mending on the east pasture. The irrigation system required maintenance. Cattle needed to be moved to fresh grazing. Normal rancher concerns. But all day, his senses remained razor-sharp. His eyes constantly scanned the horizon. His ears picked up sounds beyond normal hearing range, the difference between a rattlesnake's warning and a twig snapping under human weight. At the south fence, Jack and Diego inspected the ground carefully. Jack knelt, examining scuff marks on rocks, displacement patterns in the dirt. For men, he said quietly. Crossed here within the last 12 hours. Heading north through the property. Diego looked impressed. How can you tell? Jack pointed to indentations in the soil. Boot prints. Military style. These aren't worn by people walking miles through desert. High quality, newer boots. See this pattern? Special ops use similar treads. Good for traction, doesn't hold mud. He indicated broken twigs on a nearby mesquite. Height suggests someone moved through here in a hurry. And this, he pointed to a tiny piece of black fabric caught on a thorn. Tactical gear. Not civilian clothing. Diego swallowed hard. What do we do? For now, we watch. Get the hands to work in pairs today. Nobody goes to the south section alone. Should we call the sheriff? Jack considered this. Sheriff Taylor was a good man, but had limited resources and no tactical experience for this level of threat. Not yet. No proof they're still here. Could have just been passing through. But Jack didn't believe that. Not with his ranch circled on their maps. As the day progressed, Jack drove the perimeter of his property, ostensibly checking fence lines and water sources. In reality, he was conducting reconnaissance, noting signs of intrusion, planning defensive positions. At the southwestern corner, beside a dry creek bed, he found cigarette butts. Distinctive Mexican brand. Recent. This wasn't just a crossing point. They'd stopped here. Observed. Waited. His instincts hummed with familiar tension. The weight of responsibility had shifted from protecting his nation abroad to protecting his home, but the fundamentals remained unchanged. Back at the house, as evening approached, Jack sat on his porch, a glass of whiskey in hand. The setting sun painted the landscape in blood-orange hues. To anyone passing by, he looked like any rancher unwinding after a long day. He would notice how his eyes constantly moved, How he sat slightly off-center, presenting a smaller target. How the seemingly casual placement of his hand kept his right side free to draw if needed. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A text from Sheriff Taylor. Heads up. DEA intercepted chatter. Sinaloa, moving major shipment through sector this week. So it begins, Jack thought. As darkness fell, he activated his expanded security measures. To the casual observer, the ranch appeared to settle in for the night. Lights glowed warmly in windows. The occasional bark of his German shepherd, Max, punctuated the cricket chorus. Inside, Jack moved to his office and booted up a system that would make most military command posts envious. The screens showed thermal imaging feeds from key points around the property. Another displayed signals intelligence gathered from frequencies used by cartels. A third tracked motion sensor alerts. 20 years in special forces operating in hostile territory had taught Jack to prepare for worst-case scenarios. He'd never expected to use those skills here, but he'd installed the systems anyway. Better to have and not need than need and not have. Another military lesson. He picked up an encrypted phone, another relic from his former life, and dialed. Carter. The voice that answered was curt, professional. It's Reynolds. Remember that favor you owe me from Kandahar? Jack Reynolds. Thought you were herding cattle these days. Got a situation developing. Need satellite coverage of these coordinates. Jack rattled off the numbers defining his ranch and surrounding 5-mile radius. A pause. That's U.S. soil, Jack. Cartel activity. Sinaloa. Moving in force. Another pause. I'll see what I can do. Give me 4 hours. Appreciated. Jack ended the call and moved to a chest in the corner. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a custom Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle with which he'd made his record shot in Afghanistan, 1,473 meters. He hadn't fired it since coming home, but he maintained it meticulously. He began the ritual of cleaning and checking the weapon, his hands moving with muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions. The familiar routine centered him, cleared his mind. Jack Reynolds had left war behind, or thought he had. But perhaps a man shaped by combat never truly leaves it behind. Perhaps it becomes part of him, dormant but ready, like a seed waiting for rain. As he worked, memories surfaced. The mountains of Afghanistan, the deserts of Iraq, the jungles of countries whose names never appeared in mission briefings. Different terrains, different enemies, but always the same core mission: protect, defend, eliminate threats. Now the battlefield had come to him, to land that held his family's blood and sweat for generations, to the home he dreamed of during long nights in distant, dangerous places. Jack completed his work on the rifle and rested his hand briefly on the barrel. He hoped he wouldn't need it. Hoped that Border Patrol would intercept whatever shipment was coming through. Hoped that the cartel would choose another route. But hope wasn't a strategy. And Jack Reynolds had survived this long by preparing for the worst. Outside, a coyote howled, a lonesome sound that echoed across the Texas night. Jack moved to the window and looked out at his land, silver blue in the moonlight. Beautiful. Worth protecting. He thought of his father's words, spoken when Jack had first joined the army. You're going out there to protect folks who will never know your name. That's a special kind of honor, son. Now he was back where it all began, the circle complete. Still protecting. Still vigilant. Still ready. The difference was, this time he was protecting his own. The black SUV had passed Jack's front gate 3 times in the past hour. Tinted windows. No ranch markings. New model. Clean despite the dusty roads. It didn't belong. Jack watched through high-powered binoculars from his second-floor window, making note of the vehicle's precise movements. It slowed at the same point each time, just before the bend where his access road disappeared from the main highway. The driver was mapping his sightlines. Professional. Methodical. Dangerous. Jack memorized the license plate automatically. Mexican plates, Sinaloa region. Bold. They weren't even trying to hide their origins. His satellite phone buzzed. Reynolds. Got your satellite imagery, Carter's voice came through. Sending encrypted now. You've got activity, Jack? Multiple heat signatures at the abandoned Wilkins place 2 miles south. Been there approximately 18 hours. The Wilkins Ranch had been vacant for years, the family having given up after drought and economic hardship drove them out. It shared a water source with Jack's land, a natural crossing point. How many? I count 15 distinct signatures. Vehicle presence 2, 3 larger transport signatures consistent with SUVs or trucks. More than Jack had anticipated. This wasn't just surveillance. This was an operation. Thanks. I owe you. Stay alive, and we're even. Jack moved to his command center and downloaded the satellite imagery. The thermal readings confirmed what Carter had described. A significant cartel presence establishing a forward operating base at the abandoned ranch. Their positioning suggested they were preparing for something bigger than routine smuggling. His phone rang again. Local number this time. Jack? It's Sheriff Taylor. Got a minute? Always, Sheriff. Had a report from Bill Hendricks. Says he saw armed men on his South 40 yesterday. Didn't get a good look, but they weren't hunters or ranch hands. Thought you might want to know, being his neighbor and all. Hendricks owned the property adjacent to Jack's eastern boundary. If the cartel was scouting there too, they were establishing a perimeter around multiple properties. Appreciate the heads up, Sheriff. There's something else. Taylor's voice lowered. Got a call from Border Patrol. They found a body 3 miles from your place. One of their informants. Throat cut. Professional job. Jack's jaw tightened. Cartel sending a message? Looks that way. Listen, Jack. I know what you did before ranching. If you see anything unusual, you'll be my first call, Jack lied smoothly. The sheriff was a good man, but his 4 deputies were no match for cartel sicarios. Involving them now would only put more lives at risk. After ending the call, Jack summoned Diego to his office. The young man had earned his trust, and Jack needed eyes he could rely on. I need you to make a supply run to town, Jack explained, handing him a list. Feed store, hardware, groceries. While you're there, I want you to watch for anyone showing too much interest in you or asking questions about the ranch. Diego studied the list, understanding dawning in his eyes. You think we're being watched? I know we are. Jack moved to a map of the ranch spread across his desk. I also need you to take a detour on your way back. Drive past the old Wilkins place. Don't slow down. Don't do anything obvious. Just note how many vehicles you see and where they're positioned. Diego nodded, shoulders straightening with the responsibility. What's happening, Jack? Sinaloa Cartel is using the Wilkins place as a staging area. They've been watching the ranch, and they've already killed at least one person. To his credit, Diego didn't pale or panic. He simply absorbed the information, processing it. Why us? Why this ranch? Location. Terrain. We're in their path. Jack paused. And they think we're soft targets. Just ranchers. A grim smile touched Diego's lips. They don't know who they're dealing with. No. Jack agreed quietly. They don't. After Diego left, Jack conducted a thorough inspection of his security systems. Motion sensors were operational along all major approach routes. Cameras covered blind spots. The early warning system he'd installed, disguised as weather monitoring equipment, would detect any electronic communications within a 2-mile radius. He moved to a storage shed behind the barn, unlocking a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside lay equipment that would raise serious questions if discovered: specialized surveillance gear, tactical communications devices, and other tools he'd acquired before leaving the service. Jack selected several motion-activated cameras designed for military reconnaissance, along with remote sensors originally developed for tracking insurgent movements in dense terrain. By nightfall, he would have a more comprehensive security perimeter. He worked methodically through the afternoon, placing sensors at strategic points around the property. To a casual observer, he was simply a rancher checking fence lines and water sources. Each sensor was camouflaged to blend with natural surroundings, disguised as rocks, affixed to tree bark, or buried just beneath soil near likely approach routes. As sunset approached, Diego returned from town. For vehicles at the Wilkins place, he reported. 3 SUVs, 1 pickup truck. At least 10 men that I could see from the road. Arm. Anyone follow you? Black SUV stayed about half a mile back most of the way. Lost them when I took the county road detour like you suggested. Jack nodded approval. Anything in town? 2 men at the diner. Mexican, well-dressed. They watched me the whole time I was at Henderson's Hardware. Asked the cashier some questions after I left. I caught it in the window reflection. Smart kid. Observant. One more thing, Diego added. Rosa at the diner overheard them talking. Said they mentioned moving merchandise tomorrow night. Jack processed this. Tomorrow, aligned with intelligence from Border Patrol about a major shipment. The cartel was preparing for something significant, and his ranch appeared to be along their planned route. His satellite phone vibrated with a text from Mike Brennan at Border Patrol. Intercepted communication. Major movement tomorrow night. All agents deployed. Stay alert. Jack made his decision. He wasn't evacuating. This was his home, his land. But he wouldn't risk others. Diego, I want you to take a few days off. Visit your family in San Antonio. Diego stiffened. With respect, Jack, I'm staying. This isn't your fight. My father's ranch in Chihuahua was taken by the Sinaloa cartel 5 years ago, Diego said quietly. He resisted. They killed him. That's why my mother and sisters moved to San Antonio. So yes, this is my fight too. Jack studied the young man, seeing him with new understanding. You never mentioned that. You never asked. Diego met his gaze steadily. I know how to handle a rifle. My father taught me before. He didn't finish the sentence. Jack nodded slowly. We'll talk more in the morning. Get some rest. After Diego left, Jack returned to his command center. The screen showed no immediate threats, but the sensors at the southern perimeter had detected movement an hour earlier. Just a brief signature, then nothing. Someone had scouted his boundary and retreated. He pulled up the satellite imagery again, studying the heat signatures at the Wilkins property. They'd established a perimeter guard, professional placement. These weren't ordinary drug runners. Their positioning suggested military training. The cartel had evolved. Once merely smugglers and enforcers, they now employed former military, deserters from Mexican special forces, in some cases. They had resources, training, and brutality unrestricted by rules of engagement. Around midnight, one of the perimeter sensors triggered an alert. Jack checked the camera feed. A 2-man team moving along the creek bed that formed his southern boundary. They carried compact submachine guns and moved with tactical precision, maintaining proper intervals, using hand signals. They were mapping his defenses, probing for surveillance, testing his awareness. Jack watched as they placed something near one of his fence posts, then retreated the way they'd come. When he was certain they'd left, he moved silently from the house, navigating in darkness with the confidence of someone who'd spent years operating in hostile territory after sunset. At the fence post, he found what he expected, a small electronic device designed to intercept and relay signals. Crude by military standards, but effective for civilian security systems. They were trying to hack his alarm network. Instead of removing it, Jack left it in place. Better to feed them controlled information than alert them to his awareness. He conducted a perimeter sweep, moving with practiced silence through terrain he knew intimately. Near the eastern boundary, he found boot prints that confirmed a second team had approached from that direction. They'd retreated, but had left another electronic device concealed in a tree. The cartel was establishing surveillance points around his entire property. Preparing. Back in his command center, Jack configured his security system to transmit false data to the interceptors, normal ranch activity patterns that would mask his actual movements. Let them think they had the advantage. He slept for precisely 3 hours, a soldier's sleep, light and alert. At 4 a.m., he rose and prepared for the day ahead. The ranch still needed tending, animals required care, and regular routines needed to be maintained to avoid signaling his awareness. As dawn broke, he saddled his horse for a morning patrol. Riding gave him mobility without the noise of an engine, allowing him to check his sensors and scan for signs of intrusion that technology might miss. Near the creek, he found fresh evidence of activity. A surveillance position had been established overnight on the ridge overlooking his south pasture. Professional setup, hidden from casual observation. Excellent sightlines to the main house and outbuildings. This was reconnaissance for something imminent. When he returned to the ranch house, Sheriff Taylor's patrol car was parked in the drive. The sheriff leaned against his vehicle, hat in hand, expression grave. "Morning, Jack." "Sheriff, coffee's hot if you're interested. I won't stay long." Taylor glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Found another body. Ranch hand from the Wilson spread. Shot execution style." Jack absorbed this. Connected to the informant? Has to be. "Listen, Jack. DEA is sending a team, but they're 18 hours out at best. Border patrols stretched thin with activity all along this sector. I've got 4 deputies covering 2,800 square miles." The message was clear. Help wasn't coming in time. "I've warned the other ranchers," Taylor continued. "Most are sending families to town. Wilson's evacuating completely." "Smart move," Jack agreed. Taylor studied him. "You should consider it too." "This is my home, Sheriff." A knowing look crossed Taylor's weathered face. "Thought you'd say that." He returned to his patrol car and removed a manila envelope. "If you're staying, you should see this. DEA intelligence. Came through this morning." Inside the envelope were surveillance photos. Jack recognized several faces, high-ranking members of the Sinaloa Cartel's armed division. Trained killers. The final photo showed a man Jack knew by reputation, Alejandro El Cuchillo Vega, former Mexican Special Forces, now the cartel's head of security operations. His presence indicated this was no ordinary smuggling run. "El Cuchillo doesn't oversee routine shipments," Jack noted. "No, he doesn't," Taylor agreed grimly. "DEA thinks they're moving something big. Something worth sending their best people to ensure it gets through." After the sheriff left, Jack briefed Diego on the developments. To his credit, the young man's resolve didn't waver. "What's the plan?" Diego asked. "First, we move the cattle to the north pasture. Get them away from likely conflict zones." Jack traced routes on the ranch map. "Then we establish observation posts here, here, and here. The cartel expects to move through undetected or to face minimal resistance from ordinary ranchers. We'll let them maintain that illusion as long as possible." Diego studied the map. "They'll likely come through the creek bed. It offers the most cover." Jack nodded approval at the tactical assessment. "Exactly. We'll focus our attention there, but maintain awareness of all approaches." They could split their forces. Throughout the day, they prepared the ranch, not with obvious barricades that would signal awareness, but with subtle adjustments that would provide tactical advantages if needed. Jack instructed the regular ranch hands to take 3 days off, citing a false reason. No need to endanger others. By late afternoon, Jack's surveillance network detected increased activity at the Wilkins property. Vehicles were being positioned near the main access road. Men moved with purpose, checking weapons, establishing a communications network. Dusk brought the black SUV past his gate once more. Final reconnaissance. They would come after dark. "Get some rest," Jack told Diego. 2 hours. I'll wake you when it's time." While Diego slept, Jack made final preparations. He changed into dark clothing that would blend with the night, not military camouflage that would signal his background, but ordinary ranch wear in muted colors. He selected weapons that matched his cover identity, a hunting rifle rather than his military-grade weapons, a shotgun of the type any rancher might own for predator control. His satellite phone vibrated with a message from Mike Brennan. "Intelligence confirms major shipment tonight. High-value targets present. Stay clear, Jack. These aren't ordinary smugglers." Jack didn't respond. Brennan meant well, but didn't understand that leaving wasn't an option. This land had been defended by Reynolds' men for generations. He wouldn't be the first to abandon it. As night fell, he established a communication link with Sheriff Taylor, providing the exact coordinates of cartel activities he'd observed. Not enough to betray his surveillance capabilities, but sufficient to help law enforcement position their limited resources effectively. "I count at least 20 armed men preparing to move," Jack reported. "Heavy weapons. Military tactics." "Christ," Taylor muttered. "My deputies are positioned on the highway intersections, but we're outgunned if they come in force. Border Patrol has 2 units in your sector, but they're watching 3 potential crossing points. Do what you can, Sheriff. I'll handle my property." There was a pause. "Jack, I know your background. Just don't take unnecessary risks. These aren't insurgents. They're criminals. The law still applies." "Understood." At midnight, Jack's perimeter sensors triggered in sequence along the southern boundary. The motion was deliberate, controlled, advanced teams establishing a route. Through night vision, he observed 3 two-man teams moving onto his property, maintaining tactical spacing, communicating with hand signals. The invasion had begun. Jack watched from his carefully selected observation post as the teams converged on predetermined points. Their movements suggested they'd studied the property layout. They avoided the obvious camera positions, though not his hidden ones, and navigated directly to key structures. His jaw tightened as one team approached the bunkhouse where ranch hands normally slept. Their weapons were at the ready. They'd come prepared to eliminate witnesses. Finding the bunkhouse empty, the team moved toward the main house. Jack keyed his radio, his voice barely a whisper. "Diego. Eastern approach. 2 men. Armed." "Copy," came the soft reply. Jack tracked the other teams as they established positions around the property. The cartel wasn't just passing through, they were securing his ranch as a waypoint. Standard procedure would be to neutralize inhabitants, establish a defensive perimeter, then signal the main convoy that the route was clear. Not tonight. The cartel had chosen Jack Reynolds' ranch as their crossing point, believing it to be an ordinary border property with minimal security. They expected to find a simple rancher, perhaps armed with a shotgun or hunting rifle for predator control. They didn't expect to find a former Special Forces operative who had spent years countering similar tactics in hostile territory. They didn't expect a defender who knew every inch of the terrain, who had prepared contingencies, who understood their methods because he'd once trained to fight against them. As the advance team approached his house from multiple angles, Jack allowed himself a grim smile in the darkness. The encounter had begun. Soon, the cartel would learn the cost of their miscalculation. The first shots came at 3:17 a.m. Staccato bursts of automatic fire shattered the night as the cartel's advance team moved on the main house. Glass exploded from windows as rounds tore through walls, a standard cartel tactic, overwhelming force designed to terrorize, to freeze occupants in panic before the assault team breached. But Jack Reynolds wasn't in the house. From his position in the converted water tower that overlooked the ranch, Jack watched through night vision as cartel sicarios converged on his home. 6 men in tactical formation, moving with military precision. Behind them, a second wave approached from the southern boundary, the main force, at least 15 armed men escorting 3 vehicles. The radio at Jack's hip crackled softly. "East sector clear," Diego whispered. They took the bait. The bait was a pre-programmed series of lights and recorded sounds in the guest cabin. A false target to draw attention while Jack and Diego established their positions. The cartel would waste precious minutes clearing a building occupied only by electronic ghosts. "Hold position," Jack instructed. "Wait for my signal." The cartel's advance team breached his front door with practiced efficiency, a coordinated entry that spoke of professional training. Through the rifle scope, Jack could see their tactical gear, plate carriers, military-grade weapons, communication equipment. These weren't street thugs, they were paramilitary operatives. For a moment, he was transported back to Afghanistan, a night raid on a Taliban compound. The same tension, the same tactical calculations, the same controlled breathing as he tracked targets through his scope. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was Texas, his home. As cartel forces concentrated on the main house, Jack shifted his attention to the approaching convoy. 3 vehicles, two SUVs flanking a custom truck with reinforced sides. The truck would be carrying the shipment, whatever it was. Intelligence suggested weapons, possibly being moved to a domestic cell. The lead SUV stopped at the cattle gate that separated the main access road from the inner ranch compound. Two men emerged, moving to open the gate. Perfect. Jack keyed his radio. Initiate sequence 1. 3 seconds later, the night erupted as carefully positioned charges detonated along the access road. Not designed to kill, Jack was still operating on American soil with American rules of engagement, but to disable vehicles. The explosion shredded tires and damaged engines, rendering the convoy temporarily immobile. Confusion erupted among the cartel forces. Shouts in Spanish echoed across the ranch as the men at the main house turned toward the explosions, momentarily distracted from their breach operation. In that moment of chaos, Jack made his first move. 2 quick shots from his hunting rifle, precision fire that struck the lead vehicle's fuel tank. Not enough to cause an explosion, but sufficient to ensure it wouldn't be moving again. The cartel forces responded with disciplined professionalism, quickly reorganizing despite the surprise. Men at the disabled convoy took cover behind vehicles, establishing firing positions. The team at the main house split forces, 3 continuing to clear the building while 3 established a perimeter. Through his scope, Jack identified the tactical commander, a tall figure issuing rapid hand signals, directing his men with confident authority. Not El Cuchillo himself, but a lieutenant. Taking him out would disrupt their command structure. Jack lined up the shot, then hesitated. Not yet. Eliminating the leadership too early would only cause them to retreat and regroup. He needed to contain the situation, keep them engaged until Border Patrol could arrive with sufficient force. Movement at the South Ridge, Diego's voice came through the radio. 3-man team approaching the Hendricks property. Jack swung his scope toward the neighboring ranch. The Hendricks family, Bill, his wife Maria, and their teenage children should have evacuated to town, but he couldn't be certain. If cartel forces were expanding their perimeter to include adjacent properties, civilians could be at risk. Can you confirm Hendricks' house is empty? Jack asked. Negative. Lights on. Vehicle and driveway. Jack suppressed a curse. The Hendricks should have left when Sheriff Taylor issued his warning. Now they were potential hostages or casualties. Moving to secondary position, Jack decided. Cover the main house approach. Copy. Jack descended the water tower ladder with silent efficiency, staying in shadows as he moved toward his eastern observation post, a modified deer blind overlooking the stretch of land between his property and the Hendricks ranch. As he moved, gunfire erupted again from the main house, cartel forces continuing their systematic sweep of the building. Let them waste ammunition on an empty structure. Each minute they spent searching for non-existent occupants was a minute gained for reinforcements to arrive. Reaching the blind, Jack settled into position and assessed the new tactical situation. 3 cartel operators were indeed approaching the Hendricks property, moving in a standard search pattern, weapons ready. At the main ranch complex, the cartel forces had realized the house was empty and were regrouping, visibly agitated at finding no occupants. The tactical commander was on a radio, likely reporting the situation to El Cuchillo and awaiting new orders. Jack needed to maintain the initiative before they adapted their plan. He keyed his radio. Execute sequence 2. Across the ranch, prepositioned speakers activated, a cacophony of recorded sounds designed to confuse and disorient. Cattle noises from empty pastures. Engine sounds from vacant sheds. Human voices from unoccupied structures. A disorienting soundscape that masked Jack and Diego's actual positions while suggesting multiple defenders. The cartel forces responded predictably, breaking into smaller teams to investigate the sounds, spreading their forces thinner. Exactly as Jack had planned. With their attention divided, Jack focused on the immediate threat to the Hendricks family. The 3-man team had reached the edge of the Hendricks property and was approaching the house using standard tactical movement, leapfrogging cover positions, maintaining visual contact. Jack took careful aim at the lead operator. A warning shot first, ethical considerations still applied. even against Cartel sicarios on his property. The round impacted the ground 2 feet in front of the man, sending dirt spraying into the air. The effect was immediate. All 3 men dropped to prone positions, scanning frantically for the shooter. Jack's position remained hidden. The blind was constructed specifically to mask muzzle flash and distort sound direction. When the men began to rise, Jack fired again, another warning, closer this time. The message was clear. Advancing toward the Hendricks property would be met with lethal force. The cartel team retreated, moving back toward the main ranch complex. A small victory, but it wouldn't last. They would regroup, adapt, return with greater numbers. But Jack had bought time for the Hendricks family, time for Sheriff Taylor's deputies to reach them, hopefully. His radio crackled. Jack. Diego's voice was tense. They found something at the house. They're excited. Through his scope, Jack observed the activity at the main house. Cartel operators were gathered around a tactical commander, examining something. Jack zoomed in, focusing his scope. Maps. His ranch maps. Deliberately left in a desk drawer. Outdated ones showing water sources and access routes, but missing the key defensive positions and surveillance equipment he'd added. Another piece of false information to shape their movement. As anticipated, the cartel forces began to reorganize based on the new intelligence. Teams deployed toward the mapped water sources, logical positions for a rancher to defend or for workers to be stationed. All wrong, all empty, but their movements were becoming more coordinated, more purposeful. The tactical commander had adapted quickly to the unexpected situation. Professional. Dangerous. Jack's satellite phone vibrated. Mike Brennan from Border Patrol. Jack, we've got a situation. Intercepted communications suggest Hendricks and his family never evacuated. Cartel knows they're there. They're considering taking hostages to secure their route. Jack's jaw tightened. How long until you can get units there? 20 minutes minimum. We've got most units dealing with a firefight 3 miles west. Looks like a diversion specifically created to draw resources away from your sector. Understood. Jack surveyed the tactical situation with cold calculation. The cartel forces at his ranch had regrouped into 3 distinct elements, one securing the disabled convoy, one establishing a perimeter around the main ranch buildings, and one preparing to move on the Hendricks property in greater numbers. He needed to adjust his strategy. Containing them on his property was no longer viable if civilians were at risk. Diego, he called over the radio. Fall back to Rally Point 2. Prepare transport. Copy. Jack maintained his observation position as Diego retreated from the main complex toward their predetermined fallback position, a hidden gully where they concealed an off-road vehicle. They practiced this movement in daylight, familiar with every foot of terrain. Through his scope, Jack tracked the cartel team assembling to move on the Hendricks Ranch, 8 men now, heavily armed, receiving final instructions from the tactical commander. Their body language suggested urgency. They wouldn't wait. Another flash of Afghanistan hit him, a Taliban unit preparing to raid a village whose elders had cooperated with American forces. The same methodical preparation, the same lethal intent. His mind calculated distances, angles, response times. The Hendricks house was 800 meters from his current position, marginal range for the hunting rifle he carried. He needed to get closer, but movement across open ground would expose his position. The decision crystallized. This was no longer about defending property. It was about protecting innocent lives. Jack keyed his radio one last time. Change of plans. Moving to intervention position. Cover south approach in 3 minutes. Understood, Diego replied, his voice steady despite the escalating danger. Jack retreated from the blind and moved through the darkness with the fluid silence of a predator. Years of operating in hostile territory had taught him to become part of the landscape, matching his movement to natural sounds, using terrain features for concealment, controlling his breathing to prevent detection. He navigated to a drainage culvert that ran beneath the dirt road separating his property from Hendricks' land. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through, but it offered concealed movement to within 300 meters of the Hendricks house. As he emerged on the other side, Jack could hear engines from the main ranch. The cartel forces were mobilizing vehicles that had been stored in his equipment barn. They were adapting, finding alternative transport to replace their disabled convoy. Jack reached his new firing position, a shallow depression behind the rise of Hendricks East pasture. From here, he could observe both the house and the approach route the cartel team would likely use. Through his scope, he confirmed his fears. The Hendricks family was indeed home, shadows moving behind curtains, lights in multiple rooms. Why hadn't they evacuated? Perhaps Bill's stubbornness, his refusal to abandon his property. Jack understood the sentiment, but not with children at risk. The cartel team appeared at the edge of the property, advancing in a wider formation now, a textbook approach designed to provide overlapping fields of fire while minimizing exposure to potential defenders. Jack gauged distances, wind, angles. At this range, with this rifle, he could engage effectively. But once he fired, his position would be compromised. 8 against 1. Not ideal odds, even for someone with his training. But the Hendricks family had no chance against these men. No tactical awareness. No defensive preparation. Just innocent civilians in the path of cartel violence. No choice at all, really. Jack took aim at the lead operator, a clean shot to the leg. Incapacitating but not immediately lethal. The round found its target with precision born of thousands of hours of training. The man went down hard, clutching his thigh, screaming orders to his team. The cartel operators reacted instantly, diving for cover, scanning for the shooter. Jack shifted position rapidly, moving 10 meters laterally before firing again, creating the impression of multiple defenders. His second shot struck another cartel gunman in the shoulder, spinning him backward. 7 mobile operators remained, now fully alert and returning fire toward his general position, automatic weapons sending rounds cracking overhead as Jack pressed himself into the earth. The diversion was working. The cartel team had halted their advance on the Hendricks house, focusing instead on the unseen sniper harassing their flank. Jack crawled backward, using the contours of the land to remain hidden while repositioning for a new angle of fire. The trained operators were doing the same, spreading out, attempting to flank his presumed position, communicating with hand signals visible through his night vision. He established a new firing position and engaged a third target, another non-lethal shot to the leg. Down to 6 mobile operators. But they were adapting quickly, using terrain for cover, coordinating their movement with practiced efficiency. A seasoned soldier knew when direct engagement became untenable. Jack had accomplished his primary objective, diverting the cartel team from the Hendricks house. Now he needed to extract before they closed the net. Movement to his right caught his attention, 2 operators attempting to circle behind his position. They'd split their forces, using classic small unit tactics to counter a sniper threat. Time to move. Jack retreated through the drainage ditch as gunfire erupted from multiple directions, the cartel forces establishing a suppression pattern to pin down the shooter they couldn't see. He emerged on his side of the property line as bullets kicked up dirt nearby. His radio crackled. Vehicle approaching from South Road, Diego reported. Looks like reinforcements. Jack reached the rally point, a natural depression where they concealed the off-road buggy. Diego was already there, rifle ready, watching the southern approach. How many? Jack asked. Single vehicle. SUV. 5 or 6 occupants. Jack checked his watch. Border Patrol was still at least 10 minutes out. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The sound of gunfire shifted, no longer directed at his former position, but concentrated at the Hendricks house. The cartel team had resumed their primary objective, now with greater urgency and aggression. We need to buy more time, Jack decided. Hendricks and his family won't survive a full assault. Diego nodded grimly, understanding the implications. What's the play? Jack studied the terrain between their position and the Hendricks property. Direct engagement would be suicide against superior numbers with automatic weapons. They needed a force multiplier. His gaze settled on the cattle pens near the property line, where he kept a small herd of Texas Longhorns. Under normal circumstances, they were docile animals. But in darkness, with sufficient provocation, "We create chaos," Jack said. "Stampede the cattle toward their position. Use the confusion to extract the family." Diego's eyes widened slightly, then he nodded. It was unconventional, but they had limited options and dwindling time. They moved quickly to the cattle pens, positioning themselves on opposite sides. Jack retrieved emergency flares from the buggy, bright, noisy pyrotechnics normally used for roadside emergencies. "When I give the signal, open the gates and fire the flares behind them," Jack instructed. "Then circle around to the east side of Hendrick's house. I'll approach from the west. We extract the family through the rear door." Diego nodded, taking his position. The distant gunfire intensified, the cartel team firing warning shots at the Hendricks house, likely issuing surrender demands. Standard cartel procedure before a breach. Jack gave the signal. Diego unlatched the pen gates as Jack ignited the first flare, tossing it behind the cattle. The sudden bright light and sizzling noise sent the animals into immediate panic. 20 longhorns charging forward through the open gates, gaining momentum as they thundered toward the property line. The second flare added to the chaos, streaking across the night sky before landing near the cartel team's position. The operators turned toward the new threat just as 2,000 pounds of terrified cattle crashed through their formation. Men scattered, shouting in confusion. Disciplined tactics disintegrated in the face of primal survival instinct as horns and hooves presented an immediate danger no training had prepared them for. Jack used the diversion to sprint toward the Hendricks house, staying low, using outbuildings for cover. Through his earpiece, he could hear Diego confirming he was moving into position on the eastern approach. Reaching the rear of the house, Jack identified the kitchen door, likely unlocked in rural Texas. He tried the handle. Open. Inside, he found exactly what he'd feared: the Hendricks family huddled in their living room, Bill standing protectively in front of his wife and children with a shotgun in trembling hands. Not a fighter. Just a desperate father trying to protect his family. "Bill, it's Jack Reynolds," he called softly, keeping his hands visible as he entered. "We need to move your family now." Recognition and relief washed over Hendrick's face. "Jack? What's happening?" "Those men. No time to explain. Get your family ready to move. My ranch hand Diego is at your east door. We have transport waiting." Maria Hendricks gathered her children, a teenage boy and younger girl, both pale with terror. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere safe," Jack assured her. "But we need to move now, while they're distracted." Outside, the chaos continued: shouting men, frightened cattle, sporadic gunfire. The perfect cover for extraction. Jack led the family through the kitchen to the side door where Diego waited. Together, they hurried the civilians across open ground toward a line of trees that would provide cover for their journey to the concealed buggy. They'd made it halfway when a shout came from behind them. Jack turned to see a cartel operator who'd evaded the cattle stampede. The man raised his weapon. Jack pushed the Hendricks family down as he pivoted, bringing his rifle up in one fluid motion. 2 shots center mass. The operator collapsed. No more warning shots. Not with children in the line of fire. "Keep moving," Jack ordered, helping Maria to her feet as Diego urged the family forward. They reached the tree line as more shouts erupted behind them, the cartel team regrouping, realizing their targets were escaping. Gunfire erupted, rounds splintering bark from trees around them. Diego returned fire, providing cover as Jack guided the family toward the hidden depression where they'd concealed the buggy. "Get in," Jack directed, helping Maria and the children into the rear, while Bill clambered into the passenger seat. Diego took the wheel as Jack established a defensive position, covering their retreat. The buggy's engine roared to life. "Go," Jack ordered. "Get them to the sheriff's rendezvous point. I'll cover your withdrawal." "Jack," Diego began to protest. "That's an order," Jack cut him off. "Those children need protection more than I do." A moment of understanding passed between them. Diego nodded once, engaged the transmission, and accelerated away, taking the Hendricks family to safety as Jack provided covering fire. Alone now, Jack assessed his tactical situation with cold precision. The cartel forces were regrouping at the Hendricks house, some pursuing on foot, others returning to vehicles. They'd be after the escaping civilians, high-value hostages for negotiating with law enforcement. He couldn't allow pursuit, which meant he needed to become a more immediate threat, one they couldn't ignore. Jack moved through the darkness toward his own ranch complex, where the main cartel force was still attempting to secure their shipment and organize alternative transport. Their tactical discipline had been disrupted by the unexpected resistance, but they were professionals. They'd adapt quickly, unless he kept them off balance. As he approached the main complex, Jack could see cartel operators loading equipment from their disabled vehicles into commandeered ranch trucks. At the center of the activity stood a figure he recognized from intelligence briefings, El Cuchillo himself, directing operations with cold efficiency. The cartel's enforcer had arrived personally to address the unexpected resistance. A compliment, in its way. Jack observed the operation from concealment, formulating his strategy. Direct confrontation against their numbers would be suicidal. But targeted strikes, disrupting key elements of their operation while remaining mobile, could prevent them from regrouping effectively. Border Patrol would arrive soon with sufficient force to engage the cartel directly. Jack's job was to contain the situation until then, prevent civilian casualties, and ensure the cartel couldn't escape with whatever they were transporting. He checked his ammunition, steel in his eyes. The real challenge was just beginning. But Jack Reynolds had faced worse odds in more hostile territories. This was his land, his home, and he would defend it. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the ranch in stark relief. The approaching storm mirrored the tactical situation, chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous. Jack used the momentary flash to confirm what he'd suspected. Cartel forces had established a defensive perimeter around the main ranch complex, while continuing to transfer their shipment to the ranch vehicles. Thunder rolled across the property as Jack moved silently through the darkness, circling to approach from the north, the direction they'd least expect. The cartel operators were focused southward, toward the Hendricks property and the direction Diego had taken the family. Perfect. Each step was measured, deliberate. This was familiar territory for Jack, not just because it was his ranch, but because this type of operation had been his specialty. Solo infiltration, target disruption, asymmetric tactics against superior numbers. He conducted similar operations in countries whose names never appeared in mission briefings, against enemies whose existence was never officially acknowledged, with parameters that were never formally documented. Jack reached the equipment shed, a metal structure set slightly apart from the main compound where he stored fuel, tools, and spare parts for ranch machinery. From this position, he had a clear view of the cartel's operation while remaining hidden in the shadows. El Cuchillo stood in the center of the activity, issuing orders with cold precision. Even at this distance, Jack could see why the cartel enforcer had earned his nickname, the Knife. His movements were sharp, economical. His posture radiated lethal efficiency. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to violence, not as an emotional outlet, but as a professional tool. Jack recognized the type. He'd worked with men like that, had been a man like that. The cartel was loading large metal cases into the commandeered ranch trucks, cases consistent with weapons shipments. Heavy rifles, possibly explosives. The kind of armament that would escalate their operations against rival cartels or law enforcement to a new level of lethality. Jack's satellite phone vibrated silently. Mike Brennan from Border Patrol. Jack, we've got vehicles approaching your location. ETA 15 minutes. Sheriff Taylor reports the Hendricks family reached the rendezvous point safely. Diego's with them. Understood. What's your situation? Jack provided a terse situation report, cartel numbers, positions, the nature of what appeared to be their shipment. Professional information from one operator to another. We've got aerial support inbound too, Brennan added. But the storm might ground them. Can you hold your position? Affirmative. Jack. Brennan hesitated. These guys aren't insurgents. You're on U.S. soil. Rules of engagement. I remember what country I'm in. Jack cut him off quietly. After ending the call, Jack assessed his tactical options. 15 minutes was a long time in combat terms, especially against trained operators who were actively consolidating their position. If they completed loading their shipment and departed before Border Patrol arrived, the situation would evolve into a high-speed pursuit with all the risks that entailed to law enforcement and civilians. Better to keep them contained on the ranch where the potential for collateral damage was limited. Jack's gaze settled on the ranch's fuel storage tanks 50 meters from his position. Two 500-gallon tanks for the diesel that powered tractors and generators. In Afghanistan, he'd have rigged them to explode without hesitation, taking out enemy personnel and equipment in one decisive strike. But this wasn't Afghanistan. And despite their actions, these weren't declared enemy combatants. They were criminals on U.S. soil. Different rules applied. Lightning flashed again, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder. The storm was nearly overhead now. Jack could smell the rain coming, that distinctive scent that preceded a Texas downpour. Soon visibility would be further reduced, movement hampered by mud and standing water. Conditions that favored the defender who knew the terrain intimately. Jack reached a decision. Not the fuel tanks, too destructive, too final. But the ranch's irrigation control system nearby offered a different option. Less lethal, but potentially just as effective at disrupting the cartel's operation. He moved to the irrigation control shed, a small structure housing the pumps and electronic systems that managed water flow to different sections of the ranch. During drought seasons, the system could direct significant water pressure to specific areas. This wasn't drought season. Recent rains meant the collection tanks were at maximum capacity. Jack accessed the control panel and overrode the automated settings. Maximum pressure to the southern sections, where the cartel had established their primary position. The sprinkler heads would be insufficient for the pressure he was about to direct through the system. They'd rupture. Spectacularly. As he exited the control shed, Jack heard vehicles approaching from the main road, not the direction Border Patrol would come from. Cartel reinforcements. The tactical situation was deteriorating. He needed to act now. Jack activated the irrigation system and moved quickly to a new position behind the equipment barn. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the southern section of the ranch complex, irrigation pipes burst from the ground, sending powerful jets of water shooting in all directions. Cartel operators scattered in confusion as water erupted around them. Vehicles stalled as their engines were flooded. Men lost footing on suddenly muddy ground. The carefully organized loading operation dissolved into chaos. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the scene like a macabre theater production. In that brief flash, Jack saw El Cuchillo shouting orders, attempting to restore order to his disintegrating operation. Their eyes met across the distance, professional recognition between adversaries. El Cuchillo's expression didn't change, but his body language shifted subtly. He'd identified the real threat. The cartel enforcer raised his arm, pointing directly at Jack's position, shouting commands to nearby operators. 3 men immediately changed direction, weapons ready, moving toward the equipment barn. Time to move. Jack retreated from the barn as the first shots rang out. Disciplined 3-round bursts that tore into the metal siding where he'd been seconds before. These weren't warning shots. They were shooting to kill now. Rain began to fall, lightly at first, then with increasing intensity as the storm broke overhead. Jack used the downpour as concealment, moving low and fast toward the horse stables. The cartel operators pursued, using proper tactical movement despite the deteriorating conditions, spreading out to prevent presenting a single target, communicating with hand signals, advancing in coordinated rushes. Their training was evident. These were no ordinary cartel gunmen. These were former military, probably Mexican special forces who had been recruited or coerced into cartel service. Jack reached the stables and slipped inside. The horses were gone. He'd moved them to the north pasture earlier as a precaution, but the building offered both cover and multiple exit points. Through gaps in the wooden slats, he tracked the approaching operators. 3 men, moving in standard search formation. Behind them, the chaos at the main complex continued, water and rain hampering the cartel's attempt to salvage their operation. Jack had achieved his immediate objective, disruption of their timeline. But now he faced a more immediate threat. 3 trained operators closing on his position with clear intent to eliminate. The first man reached the stable door, pausing to signal his companions before entering. Jack waited in the shadows of the hayloft, watching as the operator swept his weapon across the darkened interior. Standard close quarters battle procedure. Textbook entry. But textbooks couldn't account for all variables. Like the tripwire Jack had installed at ankle height just inside the door, not lethal, just a simple warning system connected to a rack of metal buckets that now crashed down behind the intruder. The operator spun toward the noise, firing reflexively. Jack used the distraction to drop from the hayloft, landing silently behind the man. A swift strike to the base of the skull with the butt of his rifle, precise pressure applied to the nerve cluster there. The operator collapsed unconscious. 1 down. The commotion drew the remaining 2 operators. They approached more cautiously now, aware of potential traps. Jack dragged the unconscious man into the shadows and prepared for the next phase. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain hammered the stable roof like machine gun fire, winds rattled the wooden structure, and lightning provided sporadic, disorienting illumination. Conditions that mask sound, confuse vision, and test training. The second operator entered through the rear door, weapon raised, moving deliberately through the darkness. Jack allowed him to pass, then emerged from concealment behind a stall partition. The operator sensed movement and began to turn too late. Jack struck with practiced efficiency. A short, sharp engagement, the kind taught in advanced close quarters combat courses. No wasted movement. No unnecessary force. Just the precise application of pressure to specific points. The man's weapon clattered to the floor as he lost consciousness. 2 down. The third operator, hearing nothing from his companions, spoke urgent Spanish into his radio. No response. Jack could read the man's body language even through the rain and darkness. The increased tension, the more deliberate movement, the recognition that something had gone very wrong. This one wouldn't enter the stable. He'd maintain position outside, report to his commander, wait for reinforcements. Tactically sound decision. Jack needed to change the equation. He retrieved a flare from his pocket, the same type he'd used earlier to spook the cattle. With a quick strike, he ignited it and tossed it through a gap in the wall to land behind the operator. The sudden bright light and hissing sound caused the man to turn reflexively, a momentary distraction, but sufficient. Jack exited through the side door and closed the distance in 3 rapid strides. The operator realized his mistake and started to turn back, bringing his weapon to bear. Too slow. Jack's first strike knocked the rifle aside. His second rendered the man unconscious. 3 operators neutralized. Non-lethally, per U.S. rules of engagement. But the action would have drawn attention. He needed to move before reinforcements arrived. Rain streamed down Jack's face as he oriented himself. Through the downpour, he could see activity at the main complex. Cartel members had abandoned attempts to salvage all their equipment and were now focusing on the high-value cargo, loading essential cases into the single functional vehicle remaining. They were preparing to extract with whatever portion of the shipment they could salvage. Jack couldn't allow that. Border Patrol was still minutes away, too long given the cartel's accelerated timeline. Lightning split the sky again, followed by a deafening thunderclap that momentarily drowned out all other sound. In that moment of natural cover, Jack moved toward the main complex, using the rain and darkness as concealment. His path took him past the old stone well, a remnant from the ranch's earliest days, no longer used but preserved as a historical feature. The well connected to an underground system that his grandfather had expanded into a rudimentary shelter during the Cold War, America's brief flirtation with backyard bunkers. Jack's father had maintained the underground space, and Jack himself had reinforced it after returning home. Insurance against Texas tornadoes, his father had called it. A tactical fallback position in Jack's mind. A resource most cartel intelligence wouldn't include in their briefings. Jack removed the well's wooden cover and descended quickly down the iron rungs embedded in the stone wall. At the bottom, he moved through a short tunnel that opened into a small concrete room. Motion-activated emergency lights flickered on, revealing Spartan accommodations, cots, stored food, water, and a locked cabinet. Jack opened the cabinet with a key from his pocket, revealing additional weapons and equipment, resources he'd secured here precisely for situations where the main house might be compromised. He selected specific items with quick efficiency, then moved to the far side of the room where a detailed map of the ranch was mounted on the wall. Unlike the outdated maps he'd left for the cartel to find, this one showed every relevant tactical feature, including the underground tunnel system his grandfather had created. The original tunnels had connected the well shelter to the main house via a passage beneath the central courtyard. Jack had expanded the system during renovations, adding concealed access points near key structures around the ranch complex, including one that emerged behind the equipment barn 50 meters from where the cartel was now loading their salvage shipment. Perfect insertion point for a direct action mission. Jack traced the tunnel route with his finger, refreshing his mental map, then gathered his selected equipment and entered the narrow passage. The tunnel was low, requiring him to move in a crouch, but well reinforced with timber supports and minimal moisture despite the storm raging above. He navigated the passage with practiced ease, counting junctions and turns until he reached the access point behind the barn. A quick check of his watch confirmed that Border Patrol would still be at least 7 minutes out. Not soon enough. Jack ascended the ladder to the concealed hatch, listening carefully before lifting it slightly to assess the situation. Rain continued to pour down, reducing visibility, but he could make out cartel operators loading the last of their high-value cases into a ranch truck. El Cuchillo supervised the operation personally, his expression cold and focused despite the chaotic conditions. From this position, Jack had a clear line of sight to the vehicle, specifically to its engine block. A precise shot would disable it permanently, preventing extraction before Border Patrol arrived. He raised his rifle, sighting through the scope, finger resting lightly on the trigger. A flash of movement caught his attention, a cartel operator emerging from the barn, scanning the perimeter. The man's path would take him directly over Jack's position in seconds. Decision point. Jack lowered the hatch silently and retreated down the ladder, choosing an alternative approach. The tunnel system had multiple exit points. The one near the cattle pens would position him with a different angle on the target vehicle, less optimal, but still viable. He moved quickly through the passages, emerging from concealment behind the stone wall of the cattle pen. The rain had intensified further, reducing visibility to mere meters. Lightning flashed continuously, creating a stroboscopic effect that distorted perception and movement. Perfect conditions for what Jack had in mind. He retrieved a specialized device from his equipment, a compact electromagnetic pulse generator designed for tactical operations. Military grade, not commercially available. One of many tools he'd acquired during his service. The device wouldn't affect a vehicle's mechanical components, but it would disable all electronic systems within its radius, including electronic ignition systems, communications equipment, and night vision devices. In the middle of a violent thunderstorm, its activation would be indistinguishable from lightning effects. Jack positioned himself within optimal range of the cartel's position and activated the device. The effect was immediate but appeared perfectly natural to untrained observers. Vehicles suddenly refusing to start, radios going silent, tactical equipment failing simultaneously. To the cartel operators, it would seem like exceptionally bad luck, equipment failures due to the storm. To El Cuchillo, with his military background, it might suggest something more deliberate. Jack used the resulting confusion to approach from the eastern perimeter, where security was thinnest due to the weather and the presumed threat direction being south. The cartel's disciplined operation had devolved into increasing disarray, equipment failures, weather conditions, and the continued effects of the irrigation system disruption had combined to create a tactical nightmare for the cartel forces. Only El Cuchillo maintained his composure, issuing orders in rapid Spanish, reorganizing his men to establish security while attempting to troubleshoot their equipment failures. Professional. Adaptable. A worthy adversary. Jack reached a position 30 meters from the main activity, concealed behind an overturned tractor. From here, he had clear sight lines to both the cartel's remaining vehicles and to El Cuchillo himself. A decision point. In Afghanistan, the mission parameters would be clear: eliminate the high-value target, destroy enemy equipment, neutralize the threat. But this was Texas, and different rules applied. Still, he couldn't allow them to leave with their shipment. Whatever they were transporting, weapons, explosives, would cost lives if it reached its destination. Jack shifted his aim from El Cuchillo to the truck's fuel tank. A precise shot, not to cause an explosion, but to ensure the vehicle couldn't travel more than a few hundred meters before breaking down completely. He exhaled slowly, finger applying gentle pressure to the trigger. The rifle's report was lost in a perfectly timed thunderclap. The bullet found its mark with surgical precision. Fuel began to stream from beneath the truck, mixing with rainwater on the ground. The effect wasn't immediately obvious to the cartel operators, focused as they were on other equipment failures. By the time they discovered the damage, it would be too late to repair. El Cuchillo, however, turned directly toward Jack's position, that preternatural awareness that elite operators develop through years of combat experience. He couldn't possibly have heard the shot over the storm, couldn't have seen the muzzle flash in the lightning-strobed darkness. But he knew. Their eyes met across the distance for the second time that night, professional recognition between two men from the same world. Different sides, different loyalties, but the same training, the same instincts. El Cuchillo's hand moved to his sidearm, a fluid, practiced motion. Jack aligned his sights on the cartel enforcer's center mass. The two men remained frozen in this lethal equation, each calculating odds, angles, outcomes. A tactical stalemate. El Cuchillo broke it first, not by firing, but by speaking a single word into his radio. Immediately, his operators began to take defensive positions, weapons oriented toward Jack's location. The cartel enforcer himself didn't take cover. He stood exposed in the rain, eyes still locked with Jack's, hands still resting on his holstered weapon. A test. A challenge. Jack maintained his position, sights still aligned on El Cuchillo's chest. He could take the shot. Would be justified given the circumstances. The cartel had fired first, had invaded his property, had threatened innocent civilians. But something in the enforcer's posture gave him pause, not fear or surrender, but a professional curiosity. A desire to understand the adversary who had single-handedly disrupted an operation involving over 20 trained operators. Jack's earpiece crackled with Mike Brennan's voice. "Jack, Border Patrol units approaching your location from the North Access Road. 2 minutes out. SWAT team with them. Decision time." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the tableau in harsh relief. Jack concealed but sighted in. El Cuchillo exposed but alert, cartel operators moving to defensive positions throughout the complex. In that frozen moment, Jack made his choice. He shifted his aim slightly and fired, not at El Cuchillo, but at the case beside him. The high-value case that had been handled with particular care during the loading operation. The bullet pierced the metallic container, triggering an immediate reaction from the cartel enforcer. El Cuchillo's expression shifted from professional calm to genuine concern as he dropped to examine the damage. Confirmation. Something inside that case was exceptionally valuable or dangerous, something that justified the cartel's extraordinary measures to secure this shipment. Thunder rolled across the ranch as Jack used the moment to relocate, moving laterally along the perimeter to establish a new firing position. Standard sniper protocol: never fire twice from the same location against alert adversaries. The cartel operators responded with disciplined fire directed at his previous position, short, controlled bursts that chewed into the metal tractor. Professional. Trained. but firing at shadows while their high-value cargo leaked unknown contents onto rain-soaked Texas soil. From his new position behind a storage shed, Jack observed El Cuchillo examining the damaged case, shouting orders to nearby operators. They approached with a replacement container, transferring the contents with urgent efficiency. Jack adjusted his scope to maximum magnification, catching glimpses of the cargo between lightning flashes and operator movements. Cylindrical objects. Metallic. Specialized containers of some kind. Not weapons. Something else. In the distance, Jack could hear vehicles approaching, the distinctive sound of Border Patrol SUVs moving at tactical speed. El Cuchillo heard them too. The cartel enforcer issued rapid commands, his men responding with immediate action, establishing defensive positions, preparing for engagement. They weren't retreating despite their compromised position and approaching law enforcement. That level of commitment suggested something of extraordinary value in those cases. Jack's satellite phone vibrated. Brennan again. Jack, we've got a situation. DEA just updated their intelligence. That shipment isn't weapons. It's radioactive material. Medical-grade isotopes stolen from a research facility in Mexico City. Potential dirty bomb components. The information crystallized Jack's understanding of the situation. The cartel wasn't just smuggling contraband. They were trafficking in materials that could be weaponized for mass casualties. The specialized containers, the exceptional security, El Cuchillo's personal oversight, it all aligned with the transport of radiological materials. Understood, Jack replied, his voice steady despite the implications. Be advised, one container is compromised. Unknown if contents are exposed. Jesus, Brennan muttered. Hazmat team is 40 minutes out. Can you confirm visual on the materials? Negative. Not from current position. Jack assessed his options with cold precision. Border Patrol would establish a perimeter, but wouldn't have the specialized equipment to deal with potentially radioactive materials. The cartel forces were preparing for a confrontation rather than retreating, suggesting they valued the shipment above escape. A volatile combination with civilian lives at stake. Lightning illuminated the scene again as Jack formulated his plan. The drainage culvert that ran beneath the main complex, part of the ranch's water management system, would provide concealed approach to the cartel's position. He retreated from his current location, using the storm and darkness as cover, circling wide to approach the drainage access point near the eastern fence line. The culvert was narrow, barely large enough for a man to navigate on hands and knees, but it ran directly beneath the area where El Cuchillo had established his command position. Jack entered the drainage system, moving through ankle-deep rainwater with silent efficiency. Above him, he could hear vehicles arriving, Border Patrol establishing their perimeter. Radio chatter filtered through the concrete, orders being issued, positions being established. The tactical situation was escalating toward potential disaster. Border Patrol personnel unknowingly approaching radioactive materials, cartel forces preparing for engagement, civilians potentially in the exposure radius if containment had been compromised. Jack reached the section beneath the main complex and paused, listening carefully to the movements above. Spanish voices, cartel operators reporting positions. The distinctive voice of El Cuchillo issuing commands. The sound of cases being moved. From this position, Jack couldn't affect the outcome directly, but he could gather critical intelligence on the exact nature of the threat, information that would be vital for the hazmat team's response. He located a drainage grate directly beneath the cartel's position and carefully raised it a few centimeters, enough to observe without being detected. Through the narrow opening, he could see El Cuchillo and two operators working with the damaged container. They wore improvised protection, bandanas over their faces, gloves on their hands. Inadequate for radiological materials, but indicative of their awareness of the danger. The case lay open, revealing specialized transport cylinders inside, the kind used for medical isotopes. One cylinder had been pierced by Jack's bullet, its contents leaking onto a plastic tarp the operators had placed beneath it. El Cuchillo spoke urgently into a satellite phone, likely reporting the situation to cartel leadership and requesting instructions. His body language revealed something Jack hadn't observed before, not fear, precisely, but genuine concern. The cartel enforcer understood exactly what he was dealing with. Voices from outside the building announced Border Patrol's arrival, orders to surrender, to lay down weapons, to emerge with hands visible. El Cuchillo's response was immediate and decisive. He issued commands to his operators not to engage, but to establish defensive positions while continuing to secure the remaining intact containers. A standoff was developing, law enforcement outside, cartel forces inside, radiological materials in the balance. Jack retreated from the drainage grate and contacted Brennan. Visual confirmation on radiological materials, he reported. Medical transport cylinders. One compromised, leaking onto containment tarp. Cartel forces aware of hazard, but continuing operations. Understood, Brennan replied, tension evident in his voice. SWAT commander is establishing perimeter but delaying breach until hazmat arrives. Not good enough, Jack assessed. Cartel is securing remaining containers, preparing for potential transport or hostage scenario. A moment of silence on the line as Brennan processed the information. What's your recommendation? Jack considered the situation with the detached calculation of a professional operator. I can approach through drainage system. Access point directly beneath their position. Can provide real-time intelligence to guide hazmat response. Negative, Brennan replied instantly. Radiation exposure risk is too high. Maintain distance until hazmat team arrives. Jack's jaw tightened. By then it might be too late. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of gunfire erupting above, a sharp, disciplined burst from automatic weapons. The standoff had escalated. Situation deteriorating, Jack reported. I'm moving to intervene. Jack, wait. But Jack had already ended the call. 20 years of Special Forces operations had taught him that sometimes official protocols had to yield to ground-level realities. People were in danger, law enforcement officers, possibly civilians if the situation continued to escalate. The radiological materials represented a threat beyond the immediate tactical scenario. He moved deliberately through the drainage system, returning to the grate beneath the cartel's position. The gunfire had intensified, cartel operators engaging Border Patrol from defensive positions while El Cuchillo continued to direct the securing of the isotope containers. Jack assessed entry points, angles of fire, operator positions. The cartel forces were focused outward, toward the law enforcement perimeter. None were monitoring the floor grate. A tactical opportunity, but with significant risk. Radiation exposure. Multiple armed adversaries. Limited extraction options. But Jack Reynolds hadn't survived 2 decades in special forces by avoiding calculated risks. He removed specialized equipment from his pack, items selected from his underground cache specifically for close-quarters operations. Memory from Afghanistan surfaced, another confined space, another high-value target, another operation that wouldn't appear in any official record. Different continent. Different adversary. Same principles. Jack prepared to reveal the full extent of his training, not just to the cartel forces who had mistaken him for a simple rancher, but to the law enforcement personnel who knew him only as a retired veteran. The storm continued to rage outside as Jack Reynolds transformed fully from rancher to operator, his movements becoming more precise, his breathing regulated, his focus narrowing to the tactical problem before him. The ranch owner was gone. The Special Forces operative had returned. Dawn broke over the Reynolds ranch, pale light revealing the aftermath of the night's violence. Border Patrol vehicles formed a perimeter around the main complex. Hazmat personnel in full protective gear moved methodically through the structures, securing the radiological materials. Medical teams treated the injured, both law enforcement and cartel members. Jack sat on the tailgate of a Border Patrol truck, a thermal blanket around his shoulders, watching the organized chaos with detached calm. His ranch had become a federal operations zone, crawling with agents from multiple agencies, Border Patrol, DEA, FBI, even Department of Energy personnel to handle the radioactive materials. Mike Brennan approached, offering a steaming cup of coffee. "How you holding up?" Jack accepted the cup with a slight nod. "I've had worse days." Brennan studied him with new respect. The events of the night had revealed aspects of Jack Reynolds that few civilians, and even fewer cartel members, had witnessed before. "The hazmat team says you saved lives," Brennan said quietly. "If that damaged container hadn't been isolated and contained when it was, we'd be looking at potential radiation exposure across a quarter-mile radius." Jack sipped his coffee without responding. The operation had unfolded rapidly after he'd emerged from the drainage system directly into the cartel's position. A textbook close-quarters intervention, disorienting the cartel operators with tactical devices from his Special Forces kit, neutralizing El Cuchillo with precision strikes, securing the radiological materials before Border Patrol breached the building. The cartel enforcer was now in federal custody, along with 17 surviving cartel operators. 3 hadn't survived the night, casualties of their own decision to engage federal agents rather than surrender. DEA says this is the largest seizure of radiological smuggling materials in U.S. history, Brennan continued. Intelligence suggests they were moving it to a cell in Houston for use in a dirty bomb. Jack's expression remained impassive, but his jaw tightened slightly. The potential casualties from such a weapon would have been catastrophic, thousands affected directly, tens of thousands displaced, economic damage in the billions. "The agency directors are going to have questions," Brennan added carefully, "about your background, your capabilities. How exactly a retired rancher managed to single-handedly disrupt a major cartel operation and contain radiological materials using tactics that, frankly, most SWAT teams aren't trained for." "I was in Special Forces," Jack replied simply. "They know that. Both of us know there's Special Forces, and then there's whatever you were actually doing," Brennan said quietly. "I saw your file when we served together. Most of it was redacted." Jack met his gaze steadily. "And it'll stay that way." Brennan nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken message. Some operations remained classified for good reasons. Some capabilities weren't meant for public knowledge. "Sheriff Taylor wants to talk to you when you're ready," Brennan said, changing the subject. "The Hendricks family, too. They're calling you a hero." Jack shook his head slightly. "I was just protecting my home." "You protected a lot more than that." As Brennan walked away, Jack surveyed the damage to his property. The main house had taken significant fire during the cartel's initial assault. Several outbuildings showed evidence of the battle. Equipment had been destroyed, fencing torn down, vehicles damaged. Physical things. Replaceable. Diego approached, his young face showing signs of the night's strain, but his eyes clear and steady. "Fuel trucks here to refill the generators," he reported. "Power company says we might not get grid electricity back for a couple days with all the storm damage." Jack nodded. "Start a list of what needs rebuilding first. We'll prioritize the essentials." "Already on it." Diego hesitated. "The hands are asking when they can come back to work." "Tomorrow," Jack decided. "Once the federal teams clear out." Diego's expression shifted slightly. "Is it true what they're saying? About what the cartel was transporting?" "Yes." The young man absorbed this with the gravity it deserved. "So you didn't just save the ranch. You saved—" "We should check the cattle in the north pasture," Jack interrupted, unwilling to dwell on hypothetical outcomes. "Make sure they're accounted for after the storm." Diego recognized the deflection but didn't press. "I'll get the horses ready." As Diego walked away, Sheriff Taylor approached. The local lawman looked exhausted, his uniform muddy from the night's activities, his expression a mixture of respect and concern. "Jack," he greeted, settling beside him on the tailgate. "Got a call from the governor an hour ago. Never had that happen before." Jack raised an eyebrow slightly. "Seems word traveled fast about what was intercepted here," the sheriff continued. "Federal agencies briefing state officials. Governor wanted to personally thank everyone involved." Taylor studied him. especially the local rancher who first engaged the threat. Just doing what needed doing. That's what I told him you'd say. Taylor managed a tired smile. Also told him you'd probably refuse any public recognition. Jack nodded confirmation. The last thing he wanted was publicity, attention, questions about his background or capabilities. Thought so, Taylor said. Still, there's going to be questions. Reports. Debriefings. I understand. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the federal agents working methodically across the property. Finally, Taylor spoke again, his voice quieter. My daddy was sheriff here before me. Told me stories about your grandfather during the border troubles in the 70s. Said there was more to the Reynolds men than most folks knew. He glanced at Jack. Guessed some traditions run in families. Jack didn't confirm or deny, but something in his posture acknowledged the observation. People around here are going to look at you differently after this, Taylor added. Word gets around in small communities. It was an aspect of the situation Jack had already considered. His cover as a simple rancher, while technically accurate, had been compromised by the night's events. Too many witnesses to his capabilities. Too many questions about his background. I'm still just a rancher, Jack said finally. That's what matters. Taylor seemed to understand what he wasn't saying. Well, if anyone gives you trouble about last night, you send them my way. He stood, adjusting his belt. Oh, and the Hendricks family is at my office in town whenever you want to stop by. Maria's been baking since dawn. Says she owes you more pies than you could eat in a lifetime. For the first time that morning, Jack's expression softened slightly. Tell them I'll stop by tomorrow. As Taylor departed, Jack's satellite phone buzzed, a different tone than his standard communications. A secure line that very few people had access to. Reynolds. Quite a night, Captain. The voice was familiar. A former commanding officer from Jack's Special Forces days, now highly placed in military intelligence. Just got the brief from DHS about your little border incursion. Jack remained silent, waiting. Radioactive materials. Cartel Special Forces. Multiple agencies involved. And at the center of it all, a local rancher who just happened to neutralize the situation before it became an international incident. Is there a question, sir? A chuckle came through the line. No question. Just an observation that retirement seems to suit you, though your methods of animal husbandry are somewhat unconventional. Sometimes the cattle need extra attention. Indeed. The voice turned more serious. The after-action reports make for interesting reading. Border Patrol tactical teams particularly impressed by your improvised ranch security measures. DEA fascinated by your intuitive understanding of cartel operations. Jack understood the subtext. His former commander was warning him that his actions had drawn attention at high levels. Any issues I should be aware of? Jack asked carefully. None. Quite the contrary. Several agency directors expressing relief that you were on site. The alternative scenarios without your intervention were suboptimal. Translation, he prevented a potential catastrophe, and the authorities were willing to overlook questions about his methods or equipment in light of the outcome. Good to know. There is one other matter, his former commander added. Intelligence suggests last night's operation wasn't isolated. Cartel expanding aggressively into your region. Looking to establish permanent corridors for specialized shipments. Jack processed this information. Meaning they'll try again. Almost certainly. Different route, perhaps. Different methods. But the strategic objective remains. A pause. Your ranch's location remains tactically significant. It wasn't just information. It was a warning. The cartel wouldn't forget what had happened. Wouldn't forget the rancher who had single-handedly disrupted their operation and delivered their enforcer to federal custody. Understood. Resources available if needed, his former commander offered. Unofficial, of course. Jack considered this. I'll manage. Never doubted it. The line went silent for a moment, then, welcome back to the fight, Jack. The call ended, leaving Jack with much to consider. He wasn't naive enough to believe the cartel would simply accept their losses and avoid his territory in the future. Organizations like Sinaloa didn't retreat. They adapted, regrouped, returned stronger. And they remembered their enemies. Jack rose from the tailgate, surveying his property with new eyes. Not just as his home, but as a tactical position that would need to be defended again. The land that had sheltered his family for generations now stood as an unintentional bulwark against a different kind of threat, one that endangered not just his ranch, but communities throughout the region. A decision crystallized. This wasn't just about protecting his property anymore. This was about standing against a malignant force that threatened innocent lives throughout the borderlands. His training, his capabilities, his experience all could serve a purpose beyond his personal security. Sheriff Taylor approached again. "Jack, got some of the neighboring ranchers asking to speak with you when things settle down. Seems they're interested in improving their own security measures." Jack nodded, an idea forming. "Tell them I'm available. Might be time to organize something more formal." Formal? Community Defense Initiative. Training. Communication networks. Early warning systems. Jack's voice was measured, professional. "Cartel will adapt their approach after last night. We should be prepared." Taylor studied him with new understanding. "You're not just talking about physical security. I'm talking about ensuring what happened here doesn't happen elsewhere," Jack clarified. Civilian auxiliary support for law enforcement. Intelligence gathering. Community preparedness. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Like a neighborhood watch, but with significantly better training." Something like that. As Taylor departed to coordinate with federal agencies, Diego returned with 2 saddled horses. "Ready when you are." Jack mounted his horse with fluid ease, feeling the familiar rhythm of the animal beneath him. As they rode toward the north pasture, Diego finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "What happens now?" Jack surveyed the landscape. The ranch that had been in his family for generations, the border region that had changed so dramatically in recent decades, the communities caught between worlds. "We rebuild," he said simply. "We adapt. We prepare." Diego nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "They'll come back, won't they? The cartel. Eventually. And when they do?" Jack's expression remained impassive, but his eyes hardened with resolve. "They'll find us ready." As they crested the hill overlooking the north pasture, Jack could see his cattle gathered near the water source, unharmed, untroubled by the night's violence. Beyond them, the fence line that marked his property boundary. And beyond that, the vast expanse of borderland stretching toward Mexico. His world had transformed overnight. The careful separation he'd maintained between his military past and his rancher present had collapsed. The skills he developed in far-flung battlefields had found unexpected application on his own land. Jack Reynolds had returned to the ranch seeking peace after years of conflict. Instead, conflict had found him. But perhaps that was as it should be. Perhaps his training, his capabilities, his experience had always been leading him back to this fundamental purpose, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, standing between innocents and those who would harm them. Different battlefield. Same mission. As the sun rose higher over Texas, Jack Reynolds accepted his transformation. Not just a rancher, not just a former operator, but something necessary for these troubled borderlands. A guardian at the gate, a defender of his home and community, a line that cartels and criminals would learn not to cross. The rancher and the warrior finally reconciled as one. 1 month after the cartel incursion, Jack Reynolds stood on his front porch, surveying his rebuilt ranch. The bullet holes had been patched, the damaged buildings repaired, the signs of violence erased by diligent work and the passage of time. But Jack knew that some changes were permanent and invisible to the casual observer. The ranch now featured enhanced security systems disguised as routine agricultural improvements. Local ranchers had formed a communication network to report suspicious activities. Military veterans from 3 counties had volunteered for a citizen auxiliary program that coordinated with Border Patrol. The transformation extended beyond physical security. The community had awakened to the reality of cartel encroachment and mobilized in response, not with fear, but with resolve. Sheriff Taylor's patrol car rolled up the driveway, dust billowing behind it. The sheriff had become a regular visitor, coordinating the new security initiatives that had sprung from that fateful night. "Morning, Jack," Taylor greeted, accepting the offered cup of coffee. "Just got word from DEA. El Cuchillo's talking. Trading information for considerations." Jack nodded, unsurprised. The cartel enforcer was a professional, calculating odds, making strategic decisions. "Says the cartel's redirected operations 50 miles west," Taylor continued. "Seems your reception made quite an impression on their leadership." A small victory, though Jack harbored no illusions about its permanence. The cartel would adapt, evolve, probe for weaknesses elsewhere. But they'd think twice before crossing his property again. "The Hendricks boy stopped by my office yesterday," Taylor added. "Wants to join the Border Patrol when he graduates. Says you inspired him." Jack absorbed this with quiet reflection. Actions created ripples, influenced paths, shaped futures in unexpected ways. In the distance, Diego worked with new ranch hands, ex-military men who understood the dual nature of their employment. The young man had grown in the past month, stepping into leadership with newfound confidence. The cartel's defeat was undeniable, Taylor mused, looking out over the peaceful landscape. Though some questioned the extent of your actions, most celebrated the powerful message sent. America does not bow to intimidation. Jack nodded silently. The media coverage had been mercifully limited, the radioactive materials kept classified, the details restricted to armed smugglers, rather than the full extent of the cartel operation. His role described simply as local rancher and military veteran, just as he preferred. "You know," Taylor said, finishing his coffee. "In all the excitement, people almost forgot you're still just a rancher trying to run a business here." Jack's mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. "That's the point." As Taylor departed, Jack returned to the everyday work of the ranch: cattle to tend, fences to mend, land to preserve for future generations. The rhythm of ranch life continued, unchanged on the surface, yet fundamentally transformed. Jack Reynolds, humble yet firm, quietly stepped back from the limelight, continuing his duties without fanfare, steadfast in moral clarity. His story would be told in whispers along the border. The rancher who stood against the cartel and won. A message and a warning. The land his family had defended for generations had faced a new kind of threat, and a Reynolds man had once again stood his ground. His dual identity, rancher and warrior, no longer in conflict, but harmonized by necessity and purpose. His story stands as a testament to an enduring American truth, that genuine strength lies not in aggression, but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.